What is success? Is it having the best product or opening a shop on the busiest street? Or is success in relentless struggle for survival among thousands of competitors? Today's story takes us to medieval Florence. We will witness how a young merchant overturned traditional rules in the heart of commerce when all the advantages were in his competitors' hands. With a lesson he learned from a juggler, he would develop a strategy to make customers come to him instead of chasing after them. This story will reveal the most important secret of power, a secret discovered 600 years ago, but still used by the best businesses and brands in today's competitive world. It is not those who chase opportunities who win, but those who create situations where opportunities seek them out. In the winding cobblestone streets of medieval Florence, where the scent of fresh bread mixed with the clatter of horse hooves and the calls of market vendors, there lived a truth more valuable than all the gold flowing through the banking houses. In a world where everyone seeks something, the one who can make others come to him controls not just the transaction, but the entire game itself. For when customers, competitors, and allies all must journey to your door, you transform from a mere participant in commerce into the master of it. The year was 1374, and Florence had become the beating heart of European trade. A city where Venetian spices met English wool, where French wines crossed paths with German silver, and where fortunes could be made or lost in a single season. Within this bustling commercial maze, a young cloth merchant named Giovanni Borghese faced a challenge that would test not only his business acumen, but his understanding of human nature itself. At 29, Giovanni possessed the technical knowledge that marked him as competent in his trade. He understood the quality of different fabrics, knew the seasonal patterns of supply and demand, and had developed relationships with reliable suppliers from across Europe. But in the fiercely competitive world of Florentine commerce, where established merchant families had dominated the trade routes for generations, technical competence was merely the price of admission to a much larger game. The problem was simple, yet seemingly insurmountable. Giovanni's shop occupied a narrow street in the Oltrarno district, far from the prestigious markets around the Palazzo Vecchio, where the city's wealthiest citizens conducted their daily shopping. His more established competitors enjoyed prime locations in the heart of the commercial district, where foot traffic was constant and visibility was assured. Meanwhile, Giovanni found himself struggling to attract customers to his remote location, no matter how competitive his prices or superior his products. The traditional approach would have been to somehow secure a better location, perhaps by paying premium rents or forming partnerships with established merchants. But Giovanni quickly discovered that the prime commercial spaces were tightly controlled by a handful of powerful families who had no interest in helping potential competitors gain better access to their customers. The few available spots came with rents that would have consumed most of his profits, leaving him worse off than before. It was during a particularly frustrating week in early autumn, when Giovanni had sold barely enough cloth to cover his basic expenses, that he witnessed something that would change his entire approach to commerce. A crowd had gathered in the Piazza della Signoria around a traveling performer, a juggler whose skill was impressive, but not extraordinary. What caught Giovanni's attention was not the performance itself, but the dynamics of how the crowd had formed and sustained itself. The juggler had not simply set up in the plaza and begun performing, hoping that people would notice. Instead, he had started by positioning a small group of friends and accomplices at strategic points around his performance area. These confederates had begun watching and reacting with enthusiasm, their obvious enjoyment attracting genuine passers-by who wanted to see what was generating such interest. As more people gathered, the excitement became self-reinforcing. People joined the crowd not just to see the juggling, but to be part of whatever was creating such obvious enjoyment in others. By the end of the performance, nearly 200 people had gathered, far more than the juggler's actual skill level would normally have attracted. But more importantly, they had all come to him. He hadn't chased customers through the streets or competed for attention in crowded markets. He had created a situation where people wanted to come to his location, drawn by the promise of something special that they couldn't find anywhere else. This observation sparked an idea that would revolutionize not just Giovanni's business, but his entire understanding of how attraction and influence actually worked. Instead of trying to bring his products to customers, he would find ways to make customers want to come to him. But this would require more than simply offering good merchandise at fair prices. It would require creating an experience that people couldn't get anywhere else. Something that would make his remote location feel like a destination rather than an inconvenience. The solution began to take shape when Giovanni remembered something his grandfather had once told him about the great trading fairs of his youth. The most successful merchants at these fairs were not necessarily those with the best products, but those who created the most compelling reasons for people to visit their stalls. They understood that in a world full of similar merchandise, customers were actually buying experiences, stories, and social connections as much as they were buying goods. Giovanni began by transforming his shop into something no other cloth merchant in Florence was offering. A place where customers could not only buy fabric, but learn about it. He started hosting weekly demonstrations of different weaving techniques, bringing in craftsmen from various regions to show how their distinctive styles were created. These weren't just sales presentations. They were genuine educational experiences that attracted anyone interested in the art of textile creation. The first demonstration drew only a handful of people, mostly neighbors who were curious about the unusual activity in the typically quiet shop. But Giovanni had learned from watching the juggler, and he made sure that these initial attendees had an exceptionally good experience. He served wine and small delicacies, encouraged questions and discussion, and made each person feel like they were part of an exclusive gathering of connoisseurs rather than a commercial transaction. Word of these unique gatherings began to spread through Florence's interconnected social networks. The city's residents, particularly the women who made most household purchasing decisions, had never encountered a cloth merchant who treated them as sophisticated consumers worthy of education and respect, rather than simply as sources of revenue. Giovanni's demonstrations became known not just as places to buy fabric, but as social events where intelligent people gathered to learn something new and interesting. As attendance grew, Giovanni began to expand his programming. He invited traveling merchants to share stories about the exotic locations where different fabrics originated, creating an atmosphere where purchasing cloth became connected to broader narratives about distant lands and foreign cultures. He arranged for local tailors to give presentations about the latest fashion trends from Paris and Milan, making his shop a source of information that customers couldn't get anywhere else. But the real breakthrough came when Giovanni realized that he could use the growing popularity of these events to create something even more valuable: exclusivity. Rather than trying to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend, he began to subtly limit access, creating a waiting list for the most popular demonstrations and making it clear that attendance was a privilege rather than a right. This approach tapped into something fundamental about human psychology that Giovanni had observed but never fully understood until now. When something was easily available, people often took it for granted. But when access was limited and had to be earned, the same thing became infinitely more desirable. The harder it became to attend Giovanni's demonstrations, the more people wanted to be there. Within 6 months, Giovanni's small shop in the Oltrarno had become one of the most talked about destinations in Florence. Wealthy merchants' wives would plan their week around his demonstrations, and being seen at one of his events became a subtle marker of social sophistication. More importantly, these attendees weren't just coming to learn, they were buying. The educational aspect of the experience made them feel more confident about their purchases and more willing to invest in higher quality materials. But Giovanni's masterstroke was yet to come. He realized that he could use the success of his demonstrations to create an even more powerful form of attraction: scarcity combined with social proof. He began to announce that certain rare fabrics would be available for viewing and purchase only during specific demonstrations, and only to attendees who had been regular participants in his educational programs. This created a dynamic where Giovanni's most devoted customers became his most effective marketing agents. When someone possessed a piece of fabric that could only have been obtained at Giovanni's shop, it sparked conversations about where they had acquired such an unusual item. These conversations inevitably led to discussions about Giovanni's demonstrations, which in turn created new demand from people who wanted access to both the exclusive merchandise and the social experience of attending his events. The established merchants in the prime locations began to notice that something unusual was happening. Customers who had previously been loyal to the traditional shops were making special trips across the city to visit this obscure merchant in the Old Trarno. More troubling, these customers often returned with stories about the unique and valuable items they had discovered, along with knowledge about textiles that made them more discerning and demanding consumers overall. Giovanni's success began to attract attention from other merchants, but their attempts to copy his approach largely failed because they misunderstood what he was actually doing. They saw the demonstrations and tried to replicate them, but they missed the subtler elements that made Giovanni's events truly compelling. The genuine educational value, the carefully curated social atmosphere, the strategic use of scarcity, and above all, the sense that attendees were part of something special rather than simply attending a sales presentation. More importantly, Giovanni had created something that couldn't be easily replicated: a reputation and a community. His customers didn't just buy fabric from him. They identified with him. They felt like insiders who had discovered something valuable that others had overlooked. And they took pride in both their knowledge and their access to exclusive merchandise. This dynamic reached its peak during the spring of 1375, when Giovanni announced that he had secured access to a limited quantity of silk that had been specially commissioned from a monastery in distant Byzantium. The silk had been woven using techniques that were closely guarded secrets, and the dyes had been created using methods that were known only to a handful of craftsmen in the Eastern Empire. Giovanni didn't simply put this extraordinary fabric on sale in his shop. Instead, he announced that it would be revealed during a special evening demonstration, limited to his 20 most loyal customers, and that each piece would be sold by private negotiation rather than at fixed prices. The combination of exclusivity, scarcity, and the promise of something truly unique created an unprecedented level of demand. The evening of the silk demonstration became legendary in Florentine social circles. The 20 invited guests arrived to find Giovanni's shop transformed into something resembling a miniature palace, with exotic lighting, carefully selected music, and refreshments that had been chosen to complement the evening's theme of Eastern luxury. When Giovanni finally revealed the Byzantine silk, the reaction was everything he had hoped for and more. But the real genius of the evening wasn't the silk itself. It was what happened afterward. Each of the 20 customers who purchased pieces of this exclusive fabric became walking advertisements for Giovanni's unique approach to commerce. Whenever they wore garments made from the Byzantine silk, they inevitably faced questions about where such extraordinary material could be obtained. Their answers created new demand from people who wanted access to similar treasures. More importantly, Giovanni had established himself as someone who could provide access to things that couldn't be found anywhere else. His customers began to view him not just as a merchant, but as a curator of the rare and beautiful. Someone whose judgment they trusted and whose exclusive offerings they coveted. This reputation allowed him to command premium prices while simultaneously creating greater customer loyalty than his competitors had ever achieved. The established merchants in the prime locations found themselves facing a completely unexpected challenge. Despite their superior locations and established customer bases, they were losing business to a merchant whose shop required a deliberate journey across the city to reach. Customers were choosing inconvenience and higher prices in exchange for the unique value that only Giovanni could provide. By the end of 1375, Giovanni had completely transformed his business model and his position within Florence's commercial hierarchy. Instead of competing with established merchants for foot traffic and price-conscious customers, he had created his own category of commerce entirely. His shop had become a destination, a place people planned to visit rather than simply discovered while shopping for necessities. But perhaps most importantly, Giovanni had solved the fundamental problem that faces anyone trying to build influence in a competitive environment. How to make others come to you rather than constantly pursuing them. He had discovered that the key was not to chase customers with better prices or more convenient locations, but to create value that couldn't be found anywhere else, and to make access to that value feel like a privilege rather than a transaction. This approach extended beyond his immediate commercial success. Other merchants began to seek Giovanni's advice about their own businesses, recognizing that he had discovered principles that could be applied beyond the textile trade. His reputation for innovation and success led to invitations to join prestigious merchant associations and guild leadership positions that would have been unthinkable when he was struggling to attract customers to his remote location. Giovanni's story began to spread beyond Florence, carried by traveling merchants who had witnessed his success and wanted to understand his methods. Within a few years, variations of his approach were being implemented by ambitious traders throughout Italy and beyond. Though few achieved his level of success because they failed to understand the psychological sophistication that underlay his apparently simple techniques. The most remarkable aspect of Giovanni's transformation was how completely it reversed the traditional power dynamics of medieval commerce. In the conventional model, merchants competed desperately for the attention and business of customers who held all the power in the relationship. Customers could easily comparison shop, negotiate prices, and take their business elsewhere if they weren't satisfied with what was offered. But Giovanni had created a situation where customers competed for access to him. His regular demonstration attendees guarded their invitations jealously. His rare merchandise generated bidding wars among wealthy clients, and his educational programs had waiting lists of people hoping to gain admission to his inner circle of preferred customers. He had transformed himself from a supplicant hoping for business into a selector of who would be allowed to do business with him. This reversal of power had profound implications that extended far beyond commerce. Giovanni began to understand that the same principles could be applied to any situation where he needed to attract resources, allies, or opportunities. Instead of pursuing partnerships with other merchants, he created situations where potential partners sought him out. Instead of lobbying for favorable terms with suppliers, he became such a valuable customer that suppliers competed to offer him exclusive access to their best products. The transformation was so complete that by 1378, when the Ciompi Revolt temporarily disrupted Florence's commercial life, Giovanni's business was actually strengthened by the crisis. While other merchants struggled with supply shortages and customer uncertainty, Giovanni's loyal community of customers and suppliers worked together to ensure that his unique offerings continued to flow. His shop became a haven of stability and luxury during uncertain times. reinforcing his position as someone who could provide what others could not. Years later, when young merchants would ask Giovanni about the secret of his success, he would tell them about the importance of understanding that in any competitive environment, the ultimate victory belongs not to those who chase opportunities, but to those who create situations where opportunities seek them out. Commerce, he would say, is like courtship. The merchant who pursues customers desperately will always be at their mercy, competing on price and convenience with every other desperate suitor. But the merchant who creates something genuinely valuable and makes access to it feels special will find that customers pursue him instead. And when that happens, everything changes. In our modern world of crowded marketplaces and endless competition for attention, this medieval wisdom has never been more relevant. The most successful businesses, brands, and individuals are those who have learned to apply the same principles that guided Giovanni over 6 centuries ago. They understand that in a world where everyone is fighting for the same customers, the ultimate advantage belongs to those who can make customers fight for them. This doesn't mean being arrogant or exclusionary for its own sake, but rather creating genuine value that can't be easily replicated, and making access to that value feel like a privilege rather than a transaction. The best restaurants have waiting lists, not because they want to turn away business, but because the experience of dining there has been crafted to feel special and exclusive. The most successful consultants and advisors are often booked months in advance, not because they're trying to be difficult, but because they've demonstrated unique value that makes their time worth waiting for. Whether you're an entrepreneur trying to build a customer base, a professional seeking to advance your career, or simply someone who wants to be more influential in your community, the principles of strategic attraction remain as powerful today as they were in medieval Florence. Create something genuinely valuable that others can't easily provide. Make access to it feel special rather than routine, and let the natural human desire for exclusivity and quality draw people to you rather than constantly chasing after them. For in the narrow streets of the Oltrarno district, Giovanni Borghese learned that the greatest power in any relationship comes not from needing something from others, but from having something that others need from you. And when you achieve that position, you transform from someone who serves markets into someone who creates them.